Okay, I'm sitting here with my dear friend and colleague Marcia Sá Cavalcante Schuback, who last year, 2020, published a book called Time in Exile, in conversation with Heidegger, Blanchot and Lispector. And it's a book that deals with literature and philosophy, modernity, exile, and many complex philosophical questions. So I'd just like to begin by saying that when you speak about exile, you attach that concept to a certain sense of modernity. I mean, there's always been the thought of stepping outside the ecstatic time and history of philosophy, but you see that there's something happening in modernity. And what is that?
What I see is, I think, Vale, what was for me the intriguing force is that we live in time of exile in many levels, many dimensions. But we have a figure in philosophy that philosophy somehow has been defined as a kind of exile. When you think about Odysseus, and you think about Ulysses, and that we have the whole romantic image of thinking is that you have to live behind the known, you have to throw in the unknown, and then you get back with a kind of amplified or bigger vision of the universe to make things simple. But what I remark is that if this somehow is human condition to think, to be in the world, in modernity there is something very strange, is that there is a cut where the new law, if you could call this, is that we live behind, but there is no way back. So modernity, differently from this old figure of exile that you go as Ulysses and you go back to Ithaca, in modernity you have nowhere to go back. So this is one thing. But I also think that there is a postmodern condition in which we don't have a land to arrive to. So if the modern condition that is connected to the figure of exile is a traveling, that you live without being able to come back, post-modernity condition is the one that you live behind, you cannot come back, but you have nowhere to arrive. So no back, no future.
I mean, in some sense, it can be a terrifying situation, of course. I mean, we have a philosophical figure that is perhaps intensified, radicalized in modernity, even in post-modernity. Then there's, of course, this social, political, historical condition of homelessness, of being a refugee. And how would you? I mean, your book mainly deals with the philosophical aspect of it, but still, how would you see them as somehow underpinning each other, being in contradiction? I mean, this philosophical figure is a figure to some extent of openness. It gives you something, whereas the social-political figure of exile is not necessarily a positive one. I mean, how do you see the connection between the?
I think that what I try to show in this book is that if you understand what we could call the philosophical ontological structure of exile in these terms of not being able to go back and never arriving, that put us the figure of the in-between in highlight. I think this can help us to understand more thoroughly the condition of the contemporary refugee and migrant, because we can see that the big disquiet and the big distress of immigration, of exile, is the situation of only having a present that is totally groundless. This is the suffering of exile. I cannot say that it is how immediately this is expressed if you listen to narratives of exile. If people think about nostalgia or think about projecting a future, and the figure of exile is connected to a hope in an asylum. But if you really, really listen to the narratives, you see that the big distress is the present. This is the situation. So if you, with this ontological study of exile, maybe you can see better the ontic or the existential, concrete situation of the migrant.
We will come back to this philosophical, aspect, but just the idea of the in-between, or dazwischen in Heidegger, l'entre-deux in Merleau-Ponty, and there's a long history of thinking the in-between, which, as I see it, is largely a positive one, in the sense that it gives something, the in-between erases dualisms, symmetries, it produces a kind of openness of thought. That was my question. The openness of the philosophical category of the in-between is perhaps not entirely consonant with the political reality of the being in-between, in this present.
Yeah, but I think that if we understand better the condition, we can also see how our, fixtures, how demagogic are a lot of responses that society, that legal systems give to the migrant problems, because they really don't see the problem as it is, because there is a kind of blindness, and big blindness to understand the today.
Yeah. When you often talk about the today as you say it's a category of excess, of the too much. It is a sense of, how should I put it, an overabundance of things. When you say what we lack is the lack, what we lack is we have excess, but no transcendence. So there's an excess without transcendence. There is a fullness without lack. Can you say something about what you mean by a excess without transcendence?
Yes, because I think that we speak today a lot about the return of religion, not so much today maybe, but this was now for some years ago a trope. We also speak today when we think about new forms of fascism, as for instance in Brazil, and the return of the God, the figures and so on. But I would say that this is an illusion, because what we have indeed is excesses in all dimensions of sense, of values, of meanings, but there is no transcendence. And maybe that is why capitalism today is so connected to the figures, old figures like the figure of God, because it is capitalism that is the only transcendence that you cannot reach, that you cannot change, that cannot touch. And I think this is a difficulty, is the experience of not having, the experience of not being. What does it mean to be with this without? How can this be, fruitful, or how can this be a gift?
Yeah. We'll come back to this. Because you have this is a kind of general theoretical background, but then you also, this book is organized around 3 readings, and it's a conversation with Heidegger, with Maurice Blanchot, and Clarice Lispector. And before we come to them, you somehow define yourself in how you read, how you approach them. You speak of a kind of approaching reading, not a close reading. An approaching reading. There's one, let's call it a literary theorist, philosopher, and an author. What is this approaching reading that allows you to combine the 3 of them?
To answer your question, I have to make clear the project, because I think that this figure of the in-between, so impossibility to go back to the past, and impossibility to come to a future that leaves us in this in-between, has been treated in philosophy, but in a very static way. And I even propose that this between should be understood as a verb, to between, to show that it is an energy. In the between itself, it acts transitively in each one. And I describe this in terms of a gerundive force, a gerund, because contrary to how Hannah Arendt said once, that what remains in exile, the only thing left is language, I would say no. Even language is away somehow in our new technical digital situation. I think what remains is the existence is existing, like this, bare existence in a different sense than Agamben's. So in order to approach this gerundive sense of existence, I really felt that Heidegger is a thinker that he's close to this, and he became even closer after the war with his concept of presencing, anwesen. And but he couldn't come to the gerundive. Something stopped. So I studied in this chapter how Heidegger is close, is in this direction, but he couldn't, and what are the obstacles that his own thinking presents and puts to think into the gerundive sense of existence. Blanchot is also an author very close to this, but also he cannot come so near to this thought of his own reasons. Heidegger is a philosopher, Blanchot in between philosophy and literature, and then the third is an author, Clarice Lispector, the Brazilian great author, who is an author in gerundive. She has the grammar, she has the language for this, what I'm trying to show. They are the three also very interesting close because they work with some concepts that are explicit, not that we can read from them, but they are working on explicitly, such as the neuter, the es gibt, il y a, and a lot of figures. So I try to just talk with the three to see what I can learn with them about the thought of the gerundive sense of existence. This is the project.
If we stop for a second at the Heidegger section, you say, I think you're suggesting that what prevents Heidegger from entering into this gerundive sense of language and time is the emphasis on overcoming. I mean, we all know that Heidegger wanted to somehow overcome and step beyond metaphysics, but for you it seems this step beyond is not what is at stake. It's rather this Blanchot style step without stepping, le pas sans pas, the step without steps. Is that the stress of, in some respects you could say that Heidegger's attempt to go beyond metaphysics is a certain form of transcendence, to transcend metaphysics, but it's not that transcendence that you are looking for, right? It's another form of transcendence.
Yeah, I'm looking, I think that Heidegger wants to overcome metaphysics. Metaphysics itself is a Greek word for overcoming, we could say. So his whole thought is in direction to overcome the overcoming of metaphysics. But he is trapped in that. He cannot get out from the clôture, the closure of metaphysics. This is Derrida critique, my main critique. Blanchot, he is also in the same aspect than Heidegger. He's not using the figure of overcoming, but he is, he's stopped in the between, in this neither nor, affirming, negating. So a kind of immobilizing the thought, the movement of thought. But the problem of Blanchot is he's so afraid of presence. As much as Heidegger, even with the presencing, they are both afraid of presence because they cannot detach the thought of presence from the thought of the factuality of things, of thinghood, substantiality. And I think what I found in Clarice Lispector and her literature, it was for me, so I've grown with Clarice, but I began to study her as a grown-up, older woman, and it's really that she is the literature in which the is, I am, you are, he, she, it is a verb. So she really writes this grammar. And she really is not afraid because what she shows is that the is being is something of a presence, that is already separated from our meanings of past, present, future, and presence in philosophical tradition.
You have a series of very interesting comments on the dash in Lispector's writing. Can you say something about the dash? I was very intrigued by that.
Yes. She writes a lot with the interpunctuation, the dash, and for her the dash is the breath. No? She begins, language for her is an event, a sounding event in the world. So the dash is already also the sound of the typewriting machine, like this, but it is above all she has a whole grammar of breathing, where the dash, the column, the 2 points, the period, and so on, they have an enormous function in her literature. So the dash is also because she is the writer who is writing, the writing being written. I know it's too heavy to speak in this manner, but really she's writing the being written of writing. She's writing this gerundive. It's very concrete. And that's why when she writes, she's drawing. Yeah. So the dash is a drawing of this act of writing. She's writing the act of writing.
I mean, I think you say about Blanchot that he's somehow writing the act of withdrawal while writing. Yeah. And there's this funny quote from Samuel Beckett where he says, well, this produces fair bit of verbiage to be read quickly.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I guess you would assume that Lispector escapes that.
Escapes totally that, yes.
So what is the real difference between Blanchot and Lispector in that?
It's because Lispector, she is not writing about writing. Blanchot is always writing about writing. In Lispector, she's writing the writing, and the writing means being here, where the rain is falling in the window. When I'm writing this, the rain is falling in the window. It comes.
And there's a cockroach approaching.
Yes, everything is coming, because she's totally there. Maybe almost as a moment of meditation, we could say, when she's writing.
Can you explicate the cockroach? Because that was a fascinating.
The cockroach.
Yeah, it's very.
Yes, the passion according to G.H.
Yeah.
No? That some people think that is the gender human, is the history of. So she's a lady in an apartment in Copacabana, and then she sees the cockroach, and she has to eat the cockroach. It's so amazing and interesting to see an author who really is capable to write on the cockroach, having had Kafka. And in a totally different way, without making pastiche, without making meta literature or whatsoever. Because the cockroach, this jelly, the belly of coming, is what has to be eaten, because this is the being of life. The being has to be eaten. And this is her passion. The cockroach is the being.